So, David, your waters are lined up
wonderful.
here.
Perfect.
Okay,
Couldn't be better.
and then I'll bring it over the list.
Okay. Couldn't be better.
Good evening. That's usually not how I start my comments from up here, but Good Shabbos is a little premature at this point. So, good evening. Welcome to Congregation Bethel. I'm Rabbi Greg Harris, and it is a pleasure to have you here this evening, along with our Associate Rabbi, Rabbi Fabian Werbin. I'm glad that we are present to hear from such a distinguished speaker as David Makovsky. I do also want to thank Rabbi Werbin, where is he? I saw him coming in, right in the back there. It's Rabbi Werbin's wedding anniversary today, and despite all of us telling him to be home, he is here, and so please extend our best wishes for you to Patricia as well. But tonight's gathering is truly important. You can imagine the pressure that has been brought to bear by those within the congregation to advocate for or against the deal. And passions have been high, and many conversations have become personal, not just in the public sphere, but between opposing groups, but it's been heated and sometimes even biting around Shabbat tables within the congregation. Tonight's forum is designed to learn from an expert who will lay out the different dimensions, pro and con, related to the deal, of course known as the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action. And while we will learn about the upsides and downsides of aspects of the deal, I cannot emphasize strongly enough that the U.S.-Israel relationship is essential for the United States and for Israel. It seems that now we know that the deal will be maintained through the political process, but the politics between Washington and Jerusalem has rarely been as strained as they are now. But the core partnerships and identity and belief in a small d democratic values within a very dangerous region has not changed. So we are here because we care about the U.S., and we are here because we care about Israel. The need for advocacy and engagement related to Israel only increases. And so while I have my personal beliefs, I am asking you to get more involved in organizations which represent your understanding of what the U.S.-Israel relationship should look like. But this is not Rosh Hashanah, so you have not come here to hear me. So let me introduce our speaker, David. David Makovsky has an extensive and impressive resume, which I will only highlight now. He is the Ziegler Distinguished Fellow at the Washington Institute for Near East Policy and director of the Project on Middle East Peace Process. He is also an adjunct professor in Middle East Studies at Johns Hopkins SAIS, and recently concluded an almost 10-month stint as a senior advisor on Secretary of State John Kerry's peace team. Author of numerous Washington Institute monographs and essays on issues related to the Middle East peace process and the Arab-Israeli conflict, he is also co-author with Dennis Ross of the 2009 Washington Post bestseller, Myths, Illusions, and Peace, Finding a New Direction for America in the Middle East. His widely acclaimed September 2012 New Yorker essay, The Silent Strike, focused on the U.S.-Israeli dynamics leading up to the 2007 Israeli attack on the Syrian nuclear facilities. Mr. Makovsky is a lifetime member of the Council on Foreign Relations and the London-based International Institute for Strategic Studies. He has testified before the full U.S. Senate Committee on Foreign Relations, the full U.S. House of Representatives Committee on Foreign Affairs, and on multiple occasions before the House of Representatives Committee on Foreign Affairs, Middle East Subcommittee. Before joining the Washington Institute, Mr. Makovsky was an award-winning journalist who covered the peace process from 1989 to 2000, and he's the former executive editor of the Jerusalem Post, was diplomatic correspondent to Israel's leading daily Haaretz, and is a former contributing editor to the U.S. News and World Report. That is the abbreviated version of this very, very impressive resume. A native of St. Louis, Mr. Makovsky received a bachelor's degree from Columbia University and a master's degree in Middle East Studies from Harvard University. The format will be that he will speak for 30 plus minutes or so, and the ushers have index cards to collect your written questions on. So after he is done with his presentation, we'll break for a few moments. You can raise your hand and the ushers will give you an index card. The questions will be collected and our moderator will pose the questions to you, to Mr. Makovsky. Our moderator for tonight's forum is Larry Sidman, and Larry currently serves as our Vice President for Communications in Tikkun Olam and chairs our Am Yisrael Chai committee. I want to thank him for all of his work in putting this program together tonight. That Larry is an attorney who has specialized in the legislative and regulatory agency process for much of his career, both as chief counsel and staff director to 2 subcommittees of the U.S. House of Representatives, and then in private practice. Larry has been devoting an increasing amount of his time to pro-Israel advocacy, strengthening the relationship between the U.S. and Israel. And I understand he is one of the few people that have actually read the entire agreement just for fun. So with that, David Makovsky.
Thank you all very much. Can you hear me in the back okay? Good, good. And I want to thank the rabbi for his kind invitation, hospitality, Mr. Sidman. It's a delight to be here. I see some many friendly faces. This is a subject that is both technical and emotional at the same time. And the good news is I want to try to make it accessible to a wide audience and make it so you can walk out of here and if you say, I get it now, then I feel I did my job. That's the good part. The not as good part is that I'm not going to come down and tell you what to think. I'm going to make it hard for you. I'm going to try to present the best arguments on both sides. I want to tell you what to think about, but not what to think. I want you to make up your own minds. But I think it's important that you do not caricature either side of this debate. That's what this is really about, and why it's a difficult dilemma. And then, I report, you decide. But I have to begin with something that I haven't done in the other talks, which is I have to begin with some math because of the headlines in the newspapers this morning. And I always want to be up to date, up to the minute. The old journalist in me wants to make sure that we're cutting edge. So I have to begin with some math, and then we'll get into what we're here to talk about. The math is that if you look at the headlines today, the president has won. Now, what does it mean? This agreement, he has said, is not a treaty. It's not like the SALT treaty in the 70s, the arms control Soviet days. For that, you need 67 votes in the Senate. He has said it's a political agreement, and it's not in perpetuity that way. But, and therefore, he says it's a much lower bar. In other words, if it was a treaty, you need a supermajority of 2/3. But if it's a regular agreement, then, he says you should have a majority. If I don't have it, I'm going to use my presidential veto. And basically, it takes, 2/3 to overturn a presidential veto. So, but this time the deal is what we call the Corker-Cardin bill was you need 2/3 in both houses. So the critics have a very high bar. In other words, they needed to get to 67 themselves, the critics. He needed only a third. He needed just to get really 66 against him out of 100, not 67. He doesn't need to secure 67. So all he needs to secure is 34, really, instead of 67, which is a much easier road to travel for this president than it would be if it was a treaty. Now, to break this down in party terms, to do the math, and I hope I won't throw too many numbers at you, if you have 54 Republicans voting against, basically this president has to ensure that of the remaining 46 Democrats, only 12 at max can defect, assuming all 54 are voting on the Republican side again. So in other words, there's no majority here. All he wants to do is get a third plus one. That means to get 12 Democrats not to defect or keep 34. And yesterday he got his 34th senator, which is Senator Makovsky, who's retiring, and she put him over the top. So the headlines is today the president has won. And I think it makes our session still very relevant for reasons I'm about to say, but I think it's important for you to understand that. I think this White House, according to my sources, is going to keep going, though. They don't want to stop at 34. They'd like to get to the number of 41. What happens at 41 or 59 on the other side is that you cannot they could close off the debate. In other words, if the critics want to, filibuster or whatever, if they need 60, and if the White House can get 7 more senators, the resolution on disapproval will not even, be voted on. So we'll see. They're at 34 now. I think they've got more coming, but they've deliberately done it in dribs and drabs because they want to create a sense of momentum. That's been part of the approach. And in fact, so far, the only 2 Democrats who have defected from the president, I think you know, are Charles Schumer of New York and Bob Menendez of New Jersey. Bob Menendez was the chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. He's been indicted, and therefore he had to step aside, but he's still a U.S. senator. But there's still key senators out there, like the state of Maryland, Mr. Cardin, who was the author of the Corker-Cardin bill to set up the template for this vote. A guy named Cory Booker, a very articulate senator from New Jersey, who's in a rough spot, and there are others. But I just felt I had to start with the math. People say, well, why don't then we just, the critics, why don't they just give up if they've already lost? Well, they don't. They want to give up. First of all, they don't want them to close off the debate. They want to have a more extensive platform. So there's still those 7 in play that they want to fight for. And also they believe that if the majority of the Senate is against it, whether the number is 59, 57, or 66, they believe that this sets a certain psychological victory that sets down a marker for the next administration that the majority is not with the deal. And so the fight continues, even if the math, in a sense, they reached the finish line yesterday. So my point is, there's still a lot to argue about. It isn't over, and this is coming up in the month of September. Of course, the high holidays are coming, and we'll see how that is. It's also, I think, the Iranians certainly wanted it in September because of the UN General Assembly. That's a time when all of the world's leaders descends on Washington, in New York at the United Nations. So September will be, a very eventful month, any way you see it. Now, like I said, I want to talk to you about, get into the best arguments on both sides. Before I do, I just want to say something personal, how I came to this. I usually have in the past have been working a lot on Israeli-Palestinian issues, but in the last 3 years, I felt that this was a looming crisis between the U.S. and Israel. I'm very fortunate. My day job, the Washington Institute, said, go for it. And I said, let's convene a dialogue of 20 of the best minds we can find, half American, half Israeli, to discuss this issue. And let's see if maybe we have some takeaways we could give to the American negotiating team. And we're about to have our 11th round next week. These are names that are, I've learned a lot getting to chair this group. You might have heard some of these names. On the American side, a guy named David Petraeus, who was the head of the CIA, was in my group. A guy named Jim Cartwright, who was the deputy chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. A guy by the name of Gary Seymour, who was the president's top counterproliferation expert at the White House in the first term, a guy by the name of Bob Einhorn. Robert Einhorn was the deputy chief negotiator before he recently retired from the State Department, and the top counterproliferation specialist. A guy, my colleague and dear friend for many years, Dennis Ross, who you know, and there are many others. On the Israeli side, names like Amos Yadlin, who was in the Israeli system for 40 years. He was the deputy head of the Air Force. He became chief of military intelligence. He has the distinction of being the first Israeli to actually hit the Osirak reactor in Iraq in 1981. He was someone who, if Labor won, he was going to be named defense minister. It was announced. There are others, a guy by the name of Eli Levita, who is the former deputy head of the Israeli Atomic Energy Agency, a guy by the name of Michael Herzog, who was the top military advisor to the last 4 defense ministers of Israel, a guy by the name of Yaakov Amidror, who was the Prime Minister Netanyahu's former national security advisor. So the idea was, behind this, was to Dan Meridor, the Deputy Prime Minister. Some of these names are known to you. The idea was to convene these people. None of these people were in government now, and therefore we wanted a more, free-flowing discussion. Because once you're in government to government, I learned this myself, you're working out of talking points. So we wanted people who were not governmental. I must say that from that group, a guy by the name, also I should have said on the American side, a guy by the name of Stephen Hadley, who was the National Security Advisor of President Bush. So for me, it was fabulous to chair a group of this. It was amazing. And I really did a crash course on this stuff. And I would say that emerging from this group, on the American side, we created a bipartisan group to come up with certain concerns and thresholds that no Israelis on that. We didn't think that was appropriate, given that this is an American domestic topic. And so those deliberations were no Israelis. But the point was that Washington is so hyper-partisan. I don't have to tell people who live here that to get a consensus on these issues, Democrats, Republicans, was remarkable. And the White House came out, I think, the State Department, the White House spokesman, we embraced the Washington Institute's study group conclusions. We came back at them with a little more specifics, but they felt that they had to embrace it. And, they've been very helpful to us as we've wanted briefings since the Vienna Agreement. So I think I need to say all that just to establish a sense of how I feel I get to know the thinking on both sides. Now, one last thing before I do it, which is, and this is very quick in the technical part. I'm not a nuclear physicist. I assume many here are not nuclear physicists. There are probably a few who are. But I just want to say, and again, I'm doing it probably an injustice by simplifying so much, but there's a couple basic terms you need to know, because that is core to this debate. And if you don't get it on the takeoff, you won't get it on the landing. So I think I'll say it right up front. To build a bomb, obviously, you need obviously a missile to take it from point A to B. The Iranians have that. There's no question. They're working on some intercontinental missiles too. The second part is you need a detonator. That is like finding a needle in a haystack. No one expects to find that. But the third part is where the whole world is focused on, and that's nuclear fuel. And that is measurable, and that's what the IAEA, you'll hear me use that phrase, the International Atomic Energy Agency, everyone writes quarterly reports based on their access, but it's basically the idea that, in other words, for nuclear fuel, there's LEU, low enriched uranium, okay, that's reactor grade uranium. And then there's HEU, high enriched uranium. So it's either low enriched uranium, that's reactor grade, or weapons grade, high enriched. So when we talk about the term breakout, it's not like a breakout, a fast break in basketball, or your skin is breaking out. for teenagers here. But it's about the cushion, basically. In other words, if Iran would throw out the inspectors at their two main sites, Natanz and a place called Fordow, which is in a mountain 30 kilometers outside of their holy city of Qom. And that is of particular concern because of how hard it is to get inside a mountain. If they would throw those people out, how much time would it take for them to go from low enriched to high enriched, from reactor grade to weapons grade? That's the big question, and that is called breakout. So the president said, I want a year breakout. I want to know that I have a cushion of a year, that if they throw out the inspectors, I've got time. I could use diplomacy. I could maybe use other aspects of the U.S. arsenal. But I want to know I have a year. Now, of course, you could say, but if there's a covert site, you don't know what you don't know. So do you really have the year breakout? So every intelligence agency's been looking to see, is there a secret site somewhere? But I just think it's important because this term breakout is going to be used in the dialogue. So I try not to throw too much at you with that, but I just thought we got to start with that. So I'm going to do both roles. I won't do the imitations out of respect, and probably these are not my best imitations anyway. I do imitate Middle East leaders. That's how I stay sane. But I won't do that here tonight. So let's just talk about the case for Obama. These two men pretend they're sitting here in the Oval Office. This is the Oval Office. And the president starts and says, Bibi, great to see you. Good to come back. We haven't seen each other in a while. Is that true? Well, whatever our difference is, I'm sure you're received here with the proper protocol. I made sure my people received you at Andrews Air Force Base, and you will also get the protocol motorcade to Andrews, no stopping on Capitol Hill. Don't worry, I've already done my webcast from Jerusalem, Mr. President. So anyway, look, well, welcome back. There are no journalists in the room, BB, so we could be blunt with each other. And I know I'm not going to convince you. You're not going to convince me. But I just want you to hear, the case from me directly and not from the media. So, whatever I say to the public, this is what I'm telling you, okay? No holds barred. I bought you 15 years, okay? All right, this isn't a deal forever. But 15 years in the Middle East, as your guy Ephraim Halevi, the former head of the Mossad, I think there's a Hebrew word, netzach, means it's an eternity. 15 years in the Middle East, so tumultuous, I bought you 15 years. It's not just you, of course, it's the whole region, it's us, no question. But that's nothing to sneeze at. And let's be honest, until I declassified it, you and I know that we only had 2.5 months of breakout. I didn't say it to the American people because I don't want to scare the American people. But now I've told them. And this deal is going to get us at a year, at least for 10 to 12 years. I think I'm even 15. So if I can go from 2.5 to a year, that's something. And what does that mean? Well, it also means they don't get a penny of their money, which is locked away in bank accounts according to the sanctions. $56 billion until they comply with a few things. They've got to take the uranium stockpile and cut it by 98%. In other words, they got 12,000 kilo of low-enriched uranium now, of LEU, and they've got to cut it by 98%. You and I know that 12,000 kilo is about 10 bombs worth if they dash to the finish line. Again, nothing to sneeze at. We cut that by 98%, and we get them to mothball the centrifuges. And that is not a small thing either. Basically, we want to get them to the point that they don't have enough. They were at 17,000 centrifuges. We'll take them down to around 5,100 or so. Some of them were not operational anyway, and so, let's be straight about that. But they're going to have to mothball, though, a lot of things. And that's what got me to the year breakout. You could ask my guy Muniz, the nuclear physicist from MIT, the energy secretary, and he'll tell you. But if they take away 98% of the low and rich and they mothball most of their centrifuges, I would argue that we've done something here. Now, let's be clear. Then they get their money. It's true. And you're going to say we front-loaded it, but it's front-loaded at the second phase of front-loading. They've got to comply first. So, this is something that I think you need to realize is going to, this is not a small matter, and that we've achieved this. Also, what we've achieved is that on Fordo and Natanz is going to have 27%. It's going to have 24/7 monitors and cameras and access on a daily basis. We never had that. We were flying blind. Now, you might say, why are we still front-loading the money? Well, it's their money. And we said we wanted you to front-load compliance. They said, okay, but you've got to front-load the money. And it's our money anyway. So we agreed to that. Now, I'm trying to make lemons out of lemonade here, BB. You got to realize what's happening. The real story that we don't talk about to the public is that all these leaders from Europe, Russia, and China, they're tired of these sanctions. And I believe that I was key in galvanizing the world because people thought I'm a committed multilateralist. And so we got the deal. But if the deal somehow unravels, if we don't have a deal, we're going to lose the sanctions anyway, so Iran gets the benefits without the commitments. So I'm trying to sell basically at the peak of the market, I'm trying to tell you. This is the real world I live in, not in the world that you think I could keep squeezing the lemon and keep squeezing. Plus, I got to be honest with you. I know people want to blame me. They say that I'm, so risk-averse about use of force in the region. But look at the polling data, Bibi. I mean, my people and the American people, tired of war. We've had 2 wars, spent trillions. This is a lot for America. So I'm trying to get the best deal we can. There's no better deal out there. I could guarantee you. I've had the European diplomats. They met with all the senators, and they're not going back to the negotiating table. And let's be honest, 15 years, it's not bad. Got to compare it to something. Bombing, okay, which is, you keep thinking, Iraq, but Iran is not Iraq. Iran has got 4 times the number of people, or 3 times, and it's a different civilization. And my advisors tell me if you bomb them, you buy 4 years, but you're going to drive the program underground, and it's going to be harder and harder to get to them. And then they'll say they're working to avenge the attack, and they might go all the way. So if I can get you 15 years, 4 times 4, 16. I've almost bought you 4 consecutive bombings if you bombed every 4 years, and that's not too bad. But most importantly here is that there's that word in Hebrew or Yiddish, and I've been trying to learn these words. I learned it with the Israelis and the Palestinian negotiators, the word friar, which means don't be a sucker. I learned that one. So now I learned a new word in Hebrew Yiddish called kishkas. We're going to be in the kishkas of their program, BB. This is great. We're going to learn more about that program from the inside of having inspectors there for 15 years than we ever could otherwise. And if we had to attack them now, we're, as I keep saying in almost every speech I give, we're flying blind. So let's not underestimate the advantage of knowing the pressure points of the system. And then in 15 years, it doesn't work, so you bomb them, and we're just as good off as we are today. Now, I'm begging you to accept a security upgrade. I sent Ash Carter, my Secretary of Defense, to see you, to see Bogi Ya'alon, your defense minister, to see the IDF. He had great meetings with the Ya'alon and the IDF. The meeting with you was a bit testy, I would say. And you don't want to talk money. It's got to be the first time in the history of the U.S.-Israel relationship that the United States wants to give money, wants to give hardware, and the Prime Minister of Israel says, no, thank you, at least not for now. I get it. You don't want to talk it because you feel that it will dilute your principled opposition to this thing. And it'll hurt you on the Hill. I get that. But I've committed that after this debate is over, I use the words rapidly and smoothly that we're gonna do this upgrade. I don't call it a compensation package. I deny that term, but we're willing to sit with you, and you just got to be willing to sit with us. And let me just say, beyond the specifics here, this is a chance. Look, it's more, you could say, a hope than a strategy. But this is our one chance to normalize relations with these people after 35 years. Look at the polling data. All the young Iranians are pro-American. They want to be part of the world. We're bringing them into globalization to be part of the world. Do I know it'll work? I don't know. But I think it's worth a shot. And if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. But otherwise, we've been killing each other for 35 years. Maybe not directly. They've been killing us more than we've been killing them, admittedly, with these IEDs, these side road bombs in Iraq. But this is a chance to change the dynamic. Am I going to tell you it's a perfect deal? No, I won't tell you that. But I will tell you, Nancy Pelosi might tell you that, but I'm not going to tell you that. He said, we need to work together here to deal with the regional impact. And I know you're very concerned about what it means for Hezbollah and Hamas, but I feel, heck, if we take the nuclear issue off the table, that's huge. Then we'll deal with all this other stuff. But if the nuclear issue plus this other stuff, it's a different ballgame. And so I got to take it off the table. Would I have liked the grand bargain where they totally changed their behavior, recognize Israel? Of course. But, the perfect's the enemy of the good. We didn't get it with Gorbachev either, the great reformer Gorbachev. We didn't get it from him either. And we pressed the Soviet Jewry issue, and we pressed human rights nonetheless, as we did with Brezhnev, Andropov, and the others. So I just want to say that. And I just want to say one last word, and I hope this doesn't come across as snide, but I owe you a thank you. I was thinking of writing you a thank you note, but I thought I'd see you in person, so I didn't. But between us, I won't say this publicly, you helped me out a lot. Your speech in the Congress in March helped consolidate for me the Democrats like I never could have done on my own. Unbelievable. That helped me. I couldn't have done it without you. So thank you. And, but just know one thing. The genius in America of U.S.-Israel relations, Republicans and Democrats, we can't even agree, what day of the week it is. But we've always agreed on Israel. Maybe in different variations, but bipartisanship has been crucial. And I urge you that, I know you're friends with Sheldon Adelson and some of the others, but don't forget bipartisanship. That is central to all of us, to you, to me, and that's really what I really want to conclude with. So the Prime Minister hears all this. It says, well, Barak, that's a lot that you just came at me with. I'll say it's good to be back. We've had our differences, but I still knew my way to the West Wing. I take on face value when you say that the security of Israel is, quote, a sacred obligation. And that, but let's remember, you guys live in the Northeast. I live in the Mideast. And there's a saying among the diplomats that says, if you're not at the table, you're on the menu. And we feel we're on the menu because we're not part of the P5+1. That's the 5 permanent members of the Security Council, U.S., China, Russia, Britain, and France, +1, Germany. We're not part of the P5+1. So we feel like we're on the menu. So we got a lot of equities here. And you're going to say that no prime minister has interfered, that this is one of the great crisis points in U.S.-Israel relations. I don't doubt it, but we feel a lot is at stake. And like I said, we live over there, so we feel that we cannot be a shrinking violet. Now, let me take a step back. And again, we're being honest. There's no journalist in the room here at the Oval Office. Let's just say that something's gone off the rails here. And come on, you got to admit it, Barak, because the original objective was to eliminate the Iranian nuclear program. Now, by your own admission, we're deferring the program. We're kicking the can now to our kids, basically. Our generation will be all right, but it's our kids that will have to deal with it. We're deferring the issue. We're managing it. Again, which, I could see advantages. You can't solve every problem. But this is not a simple thing. But it's a big difference between eliminating something and deferring it, between eliminating it and managing it. And Jewish history has taught us that when your enemies say they want to kill you, you got to take it seriously. People said Hitler was about domestic consumption. He wasn't. This is a guy, Khamenei, as you know, is still tweeting out 9 ways to annihilate Israel. We're not talking the history books. We're talking about Twitter 2015 with a lot of attachments. So let's be honest that, that these are people that have not exactly changed. I hope you're right, by the way, that in 15 years the young people of Iran become part of the globalized world. No one would be happier than the state of Israel. I guarantee that. And I don't concede that to anybody. But I remember 2009, the first year of your presidency, when there was probably a majority for democracy. 2 million people went to the streets and to protest a sham election, and yet a minority that's armed and disciplined, the Revolutionary Guards of the Ayatollah, they either killed them, they clubbed them, they tortured them, they arrested them. And so my rule about the Middle East is whoever fires the shots calls the shots. So it doesn't matter if there's a majority young people polling, telling the Pew poll or the Gallup poll or whatever they're called. It doesn't matter. It matters who's got the guns. That's the world I live in. And so how do I really feel about this agreement? Very bluntly, Barak, you didn't maximize your leverage. Let's be honest. They're the ones under sanctions. We want an agreement. They need an agreement. That's a huge difference. You could have squeezed more. You could have got more concessions from them. And that's my big beef, that you didn't. Plus these guys, they want to do a deal while you're president because they don't know who's coming next. And you're still president for another year and a quarter. That meant you had huge leverage during that year and a quarter, to hold out more because they wanted to cut the deal while you're president because they don't know what's going to follow it. So it seems to me you just didn't maximize your leverage. Is 15 years a lot? Netzach, as you say, and we say in Hebrew? Yes, Middle East politics, Netzach in Israeli politics is a week, let alone 15 years. But in the sweep of history, Barak, 15 years, it's a blink of an eye. It goes by really fast. And I actually agree with you. I said this at the Herzliya conference. I said this to my cabinet. I said, people say, are the Iranians going to cheat? I don't think they will. I think they have incentive for the 15 years to keep it. Why? Because you have the game in America called hockey. These guys in 15 years are out of the penalty box. They're on the ice with everybody else. They're fully legitimate. And they can have an industrial-sized nuclear infrastructure. You're not demolishing the infrastructure. Yes, you've done great things. All the points you made, and I know you were going to add, and Barak interjects. Yes, and I forgot to mention the plutonium reactor too, where they have to rip out the core of their reactor too. That's also part of their early compliance before they get their money. No, I know. That's all good stuff. It's all good. It might be necessary, but it's not sufficient. So I'm not against the whole thing. All I'm saying is you could have squeezed more, and it could have gone on longer than 15 years. The money could have been kind of parsed out over time better so they don't get a windfall. But, we got to deal with this thing now. With the money coming to the region, we have to deal with the fact that in 15 years they're normalized. And who's going to stop these people once they can have, how many centrifuges maybe? 190,000 the Ayatollah says he wants. Now, he may be dead in 15 years, but they can have as much uranium as they want. And if we're not going to stop them now, who tells me in 15 years when they're legitimate that we're going to stop them? And there's no provisions. They could have high enriched uranium in 15 years. There's nothing in the agreement. I read the whole thing. So here we are. And then the regional stuff. We don't got 15 years there. We got to work now because, yes, I heard your Treasury Secretary Jack Lew saying that they have so much unmet needs, $500 billion, $56 billion is nothing. it's true. If Iran was Japan, Jack would be right. And I know Jack, he's a good man. But it's not true because Iran isn't Japan. They have a Revolutionary Guard. There's two wings to this airplane, right? There's the regular state run by Mr. Rouhani, and there's the deep state, the other wing, run by the IRGC by a man named Qasem Soleimani. Those are all the proxies, Hezbollah, Hamas, the Iranian, proxies in Iraq, the Shiite groups, all of them. So basically, they got to get their cut. It's $56 billion. By the way, $56 billion doesn't even count the money extra they're going to get from being able to pump oil and that they're open for business. So that's hundreds of billions of dollars. So you're telling me that the guy who's the real pilot of this airplane, of the two wings, not the president, not the head of the Al-Quds brigade of the IRGC, of the Iranian Revolutionary Guards, but the pilot, Khamenei, to keep like a certain equibalence between his wings, he's got to pay everybody off. So Rouhani just got a mega win by becoming, legit, and the whole world sees him as a peacemaker. So Qasem Soleimani's got to get his cut. So I think he's going to get, let's take the lowest number, $56 billion. I think if he gets 20%, that's $10 billion. In the Middle East, $10 billion, you could do a lot. People forget. Just a few years ago, Iran was only giving Hezbollah $200 million. That's peanuts. Imagine what they could do if they get much more. Now, it's true, Hezbollah is tied down in Syria. They're fighting these wars to help prop up Assad, an Iranian ally, but they're stretched. Their social safety net is stretched. The mothers don't like it that their kids are fighting in a foreign war. They have to give more stipends, even to the ideological people like Hezbollah. Because they'll say, what are you fighting in that country for? Stay home, stay here in Lebanon. And you're going to bring the war to Lebanon by fighting over there, because there's two sides to any war. In Syria, there's even more than two sides. So I got to live with that, in the short term. How are you going to help me on that? That's going to be hard. You can't just say, we're going to push back. Nice words. What does it mean? Next, besides the issue of the payoffs, basically, we've got a situation that, that we've got the whole world on one side of this thing, and we're on the other. But the point here is that there could be a regional arms race as a result of this. This thing doesn't begin and end with Iran. You got three countries that thinks that they're a Middle East regional power. You got the Turks, they're run by this lunatic, Erdogan. God knows if he's going to be president, I hope not. But I don't know what he's going to do. Now, Egypt, great development there with General Sisi. I'm the head of the Sisi fan club in Israel. But they're broke. Okay, so now they're not going to do anything now. They could barely they get all this money from the Gulf and they just hand it out as handouts so their people can eat. But the Saudis, they've got a great relation with the Pakistanis. My top advisors, top security people are telling me, don't be surprised, Mr. Prime Minister, if you wake up one day and in Dhahran or in one of the Saudi airfields, there's a Pakistani plane, that's nuclear tipped to help the Saudis. So you're right that in the short term, there doesn't look like there will be industrial-sized infrastructure, but certainly a deeper Pakistani-Saudi relationship is going to add. You're going to take a dangerous neighborhood that was dangerous before the nukes, and with the Iranians, the Saudis will want to, because they finance the Pakistanis, they're going to want to match it. And so this region is going to get a lot more dangerous. But I want to end with the thank you that you gave me on the Congress and say I owe you a thank you too, because you have been, for me in Israel, a secret weapon. Really, I had no idea. You're my secret weapon. I said, how's that, Mr. Prime Minister? Bibi, tell me how I'm your secret weapon. He goes, look, you've brought the Arabs and Israelis together. Nobody has been able to do that. The only thing is they're united against you. So it's the Gulf states. They don't trust you. There's Egypt, Jordan. They're all careful what they say in public to their media. They're very careful. But if you look at their state-run media, they allow a lot more criticism of you because they feel abandoned. So Iran has been the glue that has brought us in the Gulf together better than ever before. It's not public. It's not in the newspapers. It's below the radar. Our security people meet with their security people in Saudi Arabia and other places in the United Arab Emirates. But we could not have done it if it wasn't for your Iranian policy. So you will go down in history as the great unifier of Arabs and Israelis. So you thank me, Mr. President. I want to thank you. And I want to thank you all very much. Thank you. Now we'll go with part two.
David, thank you so very, very much. Not only was it incredibly insightful, but I think this is the first time since I've been involved in this debate that I actually laughed, okay? And I saw others smile, okay? And that's a gift. And David, I would suggest that you may be one of the very few people, either in this country or Israel, who could get a job being a speechwriter for either President Obama or Prime Minister Netanyahu. So to say nothing of succeeding Jon Stewart. What we're going to do is shift focus a little bit here, and we're going to move to the Q&A. If anybody has a question that they would like to pose, please raise your hand now. Ushers will be coming down the aisle. They will give you a blank note card, or if you've already filled one out, they will take your card. You all can take a few minutes. Thanks to numbers of people who actually used our email system, we've got some questions so we could start. So all of you who would like to pose a question, you can take a few minutes to cogitate. And then again, when you are completed with your written question, again, just raise your hand and pass the cards to the outside aisles, and they will be picked up and brought back up here. So we'll take just a minute, and then we'll be ready to go with the Q&A.
I'm on my tip.
Here, pull it up close, right? Okay. Okay, great. In the pocket.
Yeah. Yeah. Good idea.
Or just on
Okay, great. That's fine.
No.
We have
No, I got it. I'm fine.
okay, no dearth of questions. Great, thank you. Okay. Oh, yeah, I know. Are you good?
Yeah, right.
Okay, so I think that we're ready to begin the Q&A part, and people will be feeding additional questions. So let me start And it's clear that they're broken up into kind of broad groupings. So let me start with a couple of questions that are specific about the agreement. And then we will move on to both why this is the kind of agreement it is, and assuming, as we all know now, that the resolution of disapproval cannot withstand the presidential veto, what happens next? So first, with regard to a couple of specifics. To the extent that the Iran agreement succeeds in at least delaying or maybe preventing Iran from acquiring a nuclear weapon, that success is going to depend a great deal upon both the political will and the technical ability of the IAEA to detect violations by Iran. You know, in real estate, it's location, location, location. In nuclear arms and nuclear nonproliferation, it's verification, verification, verification. So the question is, does the agreement provide the IAEA with necessary and sufficiently timely access both to declared and undeclared sites, especially Parchin, which was the military site, to fulfill that hope of verification? And the second part is, what can Congress and the administration do now to supplement the agreement to give both more tools, resources, and raw political guts to the IAEA?
Okay, the issue, I didn't speak as much as the inspections. I expected that there would be something on inspections. I said that at places like Natanz, Fordow, and other places that are declared sites, there will be, cameras and daily access. The issue, though, is, of course, what's undeclared. And Parchin is a military base which is associated with the efforts of Iran before 2003 to try to weaponize. And Muniz, the Secretary of the Energy, has said, if there's any trace of anything, that is nuclear, of any sort, any radioactive thing, there's no way you could scrub the site. We'll be able to detect it. I think the comeback line of the critics is not, in 24 days that you won't be able to detect nuclear radioactive elements or whatever might remain. But what about once you don't say anytime, anywhere, which is what Moniz, Ben Rhodes, and some of the others said publicly a few months ago, then their view is 24 days they can hide a lot. And I think if unofficially what the officials say, look, unless you're in every hard drive at every single moment, if they want to erase things, they can erase things. So the critics say 24 days, you're giving them a lot of time to get rid of their design papers and things that are not nuclear. It's not just the nuclear thing. So you're giving them a lot of time. They like to say, well, no other countries had to accept anytime, anywhere, except Iraq that was defeated in war. We weren't defeated in war. So it's gone back and forth. There will be more money the IAEA will allocate. I think they have some excellent people. I should disclose that in our group is a guy named Ali Heineman, which you could read his insights at the Washington Institute website, www.washingtoninstitute.org, who was in charge of inspections of the IAEA. They're serious people, it is true. The question is, as he said to me, Ali, we've never had to monitor something this vast. So this is going to, as you point out, Larry, this is going to put real challenges. So is the money going to be there? The question is also, under this thing of the 24 days, they have to explain why they want to inspect something. A lot of intelligence agencies don't usually want to tell a foreign government, especially Iran, why they're interested in a certain place, because that tips their hat on sources and methods. So in terms of the question about Parchin in the past, there have been reports that, and the whole IAEA understandings, what's called the roadmap with Iran has been shrouded in mystery, and a lot of the senators have complained. It's like, we're not getting all the documentation here. You know, we don't know what the IAEA has agreed to with the Iranians about Parchin. There's all these reports that the Iranians will do their own sample sites at Parchin. I mean, that's like, you know, the net, you know, who's minding the chicken coop, the fox and the chicken coop. So, you know, there's a lot of concerns about that. They'll say, at least some of the senators and congressmen, I think, are saying, you don't trust the whole U.S. Senate? Well, we have a procedure, even for classified annexes. Why not use that procedure that at least members of the Intelligence Committee can be briefed on the IAEA deals with Iran? So I think this question of what happened before 2003, what's called PMD, potential military dimensions, or I would just call it coming clean with the past, you know, I have my doubts, frankly, that we're ever going to really know. Every intelligence agency already has put together its own theories, and I'm sure based on some evidence, but I have very low expectations about that we're going to really get to the heart of what was. The scientists will lie, the Iranian scientists. They have to go to places, they have to interview people, they have to see documents. What people can lie, you know, will they get full access to Parchin? The third part about the documents, have they not been shredded? You know, this is a big question. I tend to think that's also part of the checklist they have to do before they see a penny of the $56 billion. I have very low expectations. I'll tell you why I did not highlight that in my remarks, though, because I think when it came to Fordo and Natanz, for the most part, this was not found out by the IAEA. This was found out through dissidents, through intelligence agencies like the United States and Israel, and I believe that those intelligence agencies will be working 24/7. So I tend to think, as good as the IAEA is, and I'm sure they'll get a big boost up in money so they can expand their staff of inspectors, and I think they're serious people. I think that you're going to have to supplement that with eyes in the sky for the United States, Israel, and every other intelligence agency if there is another site. Everyone's been looking to see if there is a third site to enrich uranium, and no one has found it so far. So, you know, it doesn't prove that there isn't, it doesn't prove that there is. But I think that those supplementary efforts are going to have to continue.
Kind of moving from the near term, this agreement, to the longer term, there are a number of key dates in the agreement, particularly a 5-year date, an 8.5-year date, and then a 15-year date. And they have real significance in terms of the, shall we say, increasing level of jeopardy, both for Israel and for the United States.
Absolutely.
So if you could please talk a little bit about those.
I'm glad. I did not know these questions in advance. Nothing was shared with me. But I'm so happy that question was asked, because I was going to go on longer, but I said I'd keep the remarks, and I was hoping that I'd get asked this question. I want to focus mostly on the 15 years, because I've mentioned it a lot in my remarks. And the 5 and the 8 years relate to conventional arms and the ballistic missile ban. It's clear that there's a conflict of interest within the P5+1. The Russians, the Chinese, they want to sell. That's how they make money, is selling weapons. And they waited till the end, till almost everything was done, and they go, by the way, let's lift the other thing right away, because it was only imposed because of the nuclear, so let's do a clean slate. We'll wipe it all out. And, you know, I think the American side said, wait a second, we said this was only about nuclear issues. This was not a grand bargain. If it is, we got terrorism, we got a lot of other issues that, supporting Israel, all sorts of things. So how could it be both nuclear and conventional? I think it's a fair question. By the way, it's also a fair question to say the money that you get from unlocking the bank accounts is going to help the terrorism. So it's not like everything is revenue neutral here. The terrorism could go up. So even though it's a nuclear agreement, the P5+1 shoved through this other thing, and they wanted it all up front, and they agreed to do it, somewhere down the road. But I think the biggest point is the 15 years, and I refer you to an article that Dennis Ross and David Petraeus, who are both members of our group, among their many, they've achieved many things, and I think that this is something that, like I said, the White House has been very available to us in terms of our questions. They could not be more available. But where we have not gotten an answer, in my view, is the 15 years. What we hear is, well, if they make a move towards a weapon in 15 years, the president at that time will have all options on the table. And we in the Institute group have believed that's not enough to say we'll have all options on the table, because the whole thing is deterrence. And we want that Iran knows that the author of this agreement, Barack Obama, who's not considered the most right-wing president, I would say, to use an understatement, the United States has ever had, he says that after 15 years, our interpretation of the JCPOA, the Vienna Agreement, is you cannot go from low enriched to high enriched. Because once they're in the high enriched level, it's off to the races. I mean, the distance between, they become a threshold nuclear state. They choose at the time of their choosing when they want to weaponize with their detonators and all that. And so therefore, let's nip it in the bud now and say, in 15 years, our interpretation, the United States, we don't speak for the whole P5+1. We're not renegotiating anything. We're talking outside of the four corners of this agreement. But we're not Micronesia either, the United States. And we're going to say our interpretation is you don't have a right to have high enriched uranium. And if you do that, we will use not all options on the table, but all necessary measures, including the use of force. And we're going to have the U.S. Congress say the same thing. Because for us, what's important is, that you don't go become a nuclear state, period. And we don't want any ambiguity about that. And, you say, well, we said if they make a dash for the bomb, all options are on the table. But I think that the Ross-Petraeus op-ed really put it well, which is to say this agreement has a lot of really good things. There's a lot of achievements in it. But if we've just deferred it 15 years and then they have their nuclear infrastructure, then they're legitimate to have as much high-enriched uranium as they want. So why not, outside of the agreement, make that declaration now? And I personally think that would be, if you're a supporter of this agreement, of course, if you're not a supporter, this won't make the difference. But if you're a supporter, I think this would be a key point. My hope is that the remaining senators who are still on the fence, even though the president has won already, that they will say to him, you want to get to 41? This is what it'll take, endorse the Ross-Petraeus op-ed. Make a statement now. We don't want ambiguity about the 15 years.
So that is actually a perfect segue to what I think is the largest number of questions that have been posed. The Ross-Petraeus op-ed talked about the president making a clear statement. I think a lot of people in the Congress, especially supporters of the deal ultimately, but those who have agonized incredibly about where they were going to end up, will want to do something affirmative and even something muscular to demonstrate that there really is going to be a deterrence. And so the question is, what can Congress do, even in this time frame, as the veto activity is bouncing back and forth between the White House and Capitol Hill? What can Congress do to strengthen, if you would, the agreement, albeit outside the four corners of the agreement?
Right. That to me is the key point. And I would hope if the president wants these senators that they would make their votes contingent on this. a statement by him. He's now written his second letter. He did one to the House, Gerald Nadler, a couple weeks ago. He's just done one to Senator Coons. He said we'll be tough on Hezbollah in the region. There are these UN Security Council things. I mean, there's a few of us who could probably fit us all in a phone booth who follow all this, but there was something called 1701 after the Israel-Hezbollah war of 2006 that says you're not allowed to import weaponry to help Hezbollah in Lebanon. But it was never implemented because the Syrians weren't interested in it. There was no real border between Syria and Lebanon. So no one did a thing. It was really a way to end the war. Why not use that? Or use the fact about the Treasury sanctioning more of these banks and entities. When you read the agreement, I know you have, Larry, you see pages and pages of banks that are going to have sanctions lifted from Iran. But, you know, if there's compliance, of course. But the point is, are some of these same banks engaged in terrorism? Not just nuclear activity. Now, you can't take the wholesale of executive orders from the Treasury and just take that architecture and self-impose it on terrorism and said anything we use the word nuclear, we're now calling terrorism. No, but there's a way to beef up the amount of sanctions there, and I think to have more coordination with the Europeans, because, frankly, we don't do that much business with Iran anyway. So Europe is a tougher player here. I think also the question of how the American banks react is going to be a key question. The European banks do more business with Iran, with the United States, than they will ever do with Iran. They don't want to run afoul of the U.S. Treasury. That's clear to us. So the question here is, is the Treasury going to tell these banks, listen, if you play around with their terrorists and launder their money, we're not going to give you the green light to deal with the Iranians and what's called the secondary sanctions. So I think on sanctions, we could put some teeth into that. I think on the 15-year HEU, the high-enriched uranium, there should be a statement by the president that is endorsed by the Congress. And if the president doesn't do it, I would hope the Congress would do it anyway. I tell you, you meet with these senators, you meet with these congressmen, I go up there. It's like you said. It's exactly like you said. There's a lot of angst. People are taking this really seriously. And also, you know, if you're just thinking about the politics, there are people who in the Democratic side, they want to be seen as both pro-Obama and pro-Israel. And they want to be sure there's something muscular that they could come out with. So I tend to think that you're right, and that there will be some things. There might be some legislation on Hezbollah. I don't know how much the domestic legislation will happen. To me, the key is the understanding with the Europeans. I wish we would use the period now, before we have the deal. The Europeans are desperate for us to agree to this thing. Some people believe the Europeans will go ahead even without us. I think there's a real chance of that. But they certainly want us to vote with them. And I would use our leverage now, and I would use our leverage we have with the European banks because of the Treasury, and say, you want us? Well, this is what we want from you. We want real teeth on terrorism sanctions, and we would love to get something from you on 15 years on the HEU. On if they go to high and rich, we're going to use force. But we're not expecting that part because that's not Europe's style. They're more into the carrots than they are into the sticks. Okay, but the United States Congress, we could do our part. And I would hope that if you're a supporter, or even if you're a critic, and a critic who says, hey, the game's over, but we don't want to throw in the towel, but if the game's up, at least join those who want there to be U.S. points here, outside of the four corners of the agreement, but real points. I would add the obvious also, which is the importance of the U.S.-Israel security relationship, which has been put on hold. Essentially. And the good news for me is that I see on the U.S. professional side, and certainly on the Israeli professional side, the military to military, there's a real desire to re-engage. You might say, I don't trust what this politician says or that politician says, but the professionals do want that cooperation. And if this deal is going to happen, whether you like it or not, then you want to be sure that the U.S.-Israel relationship, if it's not 24/7, it's 24/6, and that is working all the time to monitor the bank accounts, to see if there's a new flow of funds coming to the Middle East. You know, the president told the Gulf states at the Camp David thing, he said this publicly, it's not a secret, to talk about more maritime interdiction of weapons going to Iranian proxies. There's a lot that needs to be done, but all of this requires the United States and Israel to resume their ties. And I would add another piece to this on the U.S.-Israel thing, and it kind of brings us full circle to the 15 years. There's a weapon system that Israel does not have that I think that could be a game changer, and it's called the MOP. I know it sounds very like domestic, but the MOP is the maximum ordnance penetrator. It's all on the public view. We call it the mountain buster. You've heard of a bunker buster? This is a mountain buster, and it could cut through Fordo. It does it in different phases, but the technical stuff is not important. But to have that weapon, it's a 30,000-pound bomb. Israel doesn't have it, and Israel doesn't have the planes to carry it. Israel doesn't have the runways to carry the planes to carry the bomb. So the F-15, the F-16, the F-35 that Israel's getting next year, thanks to the United States, it won't carry it. So I think another thing to reinforce deterrence for 15 years is to say we're going to give Israel the MOP and the requisite aircraft to carry it. Maybe not tomorrow morning, but over the course of 15 years. It takes time. Also, pilots have to train, etc. But we're going to give Israel the tools to defend itself. And I think that's a message to the Iranians to say, you don't believe the United States? You think we've lost the will to fight? Well, maybe you won't doubt the state of Israel. And I see that as part of the U.S.-Israel thing. It's also, I think, in the Ross Petraeus piece. And I think that would also send a very clear signal.
David, I think your answer makes it certain that nobody will leave here thinking that it's over, okay? What you have answered is the antithesis of the debate being over. We may well be at the end of the beginning rather than the beginning of the end. And I think that's very important for people psychically as well as politically. So our clergy often joke that this congregation is dominated by lawyers. So, of course, the next most popular category of questions tend to be legal, which relate to the status of this agreement. You indicated in your remarks that it's not a treaty.
It's like the administration has made that determination.
Right, the administration.
I didn't express a personal feeling.
The administration has made that determination. Since Congress won't be approving it, it won't have the votes to overcome a presidential veto of their disapproval. It's not a congressional executive agreement either. So it's, an executive agreement. So the question is, what impact does that status have with regard to what happens on January 21, 2017, when there's a new president who may view the world, regardless of whether the new president is a Democrat or a Republican, may view the world and this agreement somewhat differently?
No, it's an excellent question. You know, as I've been asked, why doesn't members of Congress take the administration to the Supreme Court, forcing it to be a treaty? They're not doing it for whatever reason. The Supreme Court tends to be deferential to administration on things like this. Although there hasn't been anything like this, this is the biggest event in 30 years, since the Soviet arms control agreements. But it hasn't happened. Look, this to me is why the Iranians are so keen, let's put it this way, this is why the administration is so relaxed and the Iranians are so keen, I think, that to front load it. Because basically the administration says is, you don't get a penny of your assets until you do the compliance checklist. Now, I asked, I was openly skeptical, of your question about the Parchin and the whole PMD business about coming clean with the past. How's the IAEA going to write a report if they're not going to have the full access. But certainly when it comes to this, taking out the 98% of the centrifuges, of the stockpile, and dropping the centrifuges and mothballing them from whatever it is, 17,000 or 19,000 to 5,000, that is all front-loaded. And the feeling is they're going to want to do this before next January because they want their money. And they won't be sure that a new administration will give them their money. And therefore, they've got an incentive to comply, to do it on the watch of the people that actually did the agreement. So you could say, look, once they've done their part, front-loaded it, and they get their money, then it's more of an enforcement issue of compliance, of just, making sure that, Bordeaux and all this is going well. They have to also rip out the plutonium reactor, too, the core of it. So once they've front-loaded the obligations and they get their money before January of 2017, once that date rolls around, I think they're a little more relaxed. Now, could the Treasury Secretary of 2017 say there's been a violation on something and, we're going to want to snap back, what's called snap back the sanctions? That could happen. There's a lot of skepticism in Israel, and not just in Israel, but in the United States, about snapback. In other words, snapback says if there's a violation, all the sanctions return to where they were. But the problem is that's also multilateral sanctions. That's not just American sanctions. So there's a general cynicism, I would say, maybe you could say it's unfair, that once people start doing business with Iran, you're not going to go backwards so fast. So some people have asked how really feasible or practical is snapback going to be. In practice, in theory, you have that option if there is a violation. One of the things of our group was to try to use this time with the Europeans to try to get an understanding of defining violations and consequences. Again, during the period that they need us the most, which is now, before Congress has voted. Even with all these senators making announcements, there hasn't been an actual vote. And they're deathly worried about the Treasury, that the Treasury gives them the green light for their banks. The banks are very cautious people, these bankers in Europe. They want to make sure they have the green light. Can they be sure that they don't get a red light, down the road? Our point was, since Europe has got more economics at stake than we do, is use this time to get understandings with our European allies. We've been sitting with them for years on this, in Vienna, in Geneva, and this and that. We've been talking about the Iranians. Forget the Iranians for a second. Let's get an understanding of Europe, and forget China, forget Russia. I'm talking Britain, France, Germany. France was the most hawkish of all of them, by the way, in the talks. Get an understanding with these three countries, and Brussels is sitting in there too, and talk to them and say, listen, most of us don't want to bring the whole house down. If there's let's say there's a lower violation, there's something at the margins that isn't being kept. It's not central. It's not a material breach. But let's create a table where we could define this is a violation and these are the consequences. So America isn't alone. We're working with our Europeans in the best multilateral tradition. And again, Iran knows there's a price to be paid. To me, that's the key point on each of it's all the same argument, really. When you think about what I said about 15 years, when you think about what I said about the MOP, when you think about what I'm saying here, it's how do we get the Iranians to understand that there's deterrence. And we could do this outside of the four corners of the agreement. This is not about renegotiating, because I don't believe anybody's going to renegotiate. Everyone thinks they've reached the finish line, they're done. But we, the United States, can do things. Like I said, we're not Micronesia. And we can work with the Europeans to reinforce, to make sure there's teeth to some of these things. But we got to use the time. Now, the administration's approach has been better that it's not defined, so let the Iranians think that they'll pay the maximum price for any violation. We don't have to write down the violation as if it's the penal code. We're not gonna tell them what the penalty is. Let them think the worst, and then we'll figure it out. In theory, that's nice. In practice, I don't believe it, because in practice, instead of thinking the worst, they'll think the least, and they'll think Europe is going to want to do business with them, so there's no real consequences. I'd rather us nail it down with the Europeans on mid-level violations, on the biggest violations we know, but you don't usually want to bring the house down on the cheating at the edges. And by the way, it's interesting, the Prime Minister doesn't think there's going to be a huge material breach. Not that I've seen, at least, of his remarks, what he said to the Herzliya conference in public, he's been quoted saying to his own cabinet, because he thinks the big payoff for Iran is to be legitimate, 15 years, industrial-sized nuclear infrastructure, they're back on the ice. So, but the question is the marginal violations and the mid-level violations. I think we should get understanding with the Europeans.
So now let's shift gears a little bit again and look both retrospectively first and then to the future. There have been crises before in the U.S.-Israel relationship. The Reagan plan, Baker housing guarantees, AWACS for Saudi Arabia, Sinai withdrawal after 56, etc. How does this crisis in the U.S.-Israel relationship compare with the others? And do you think it will have a long-term impact on the U.S.-Israel?
It's a great question, and I don't know if I can give, we can't look into the future, so we always have to be humble, in my view, when we say what we don't know. I think if I teach history and at SAIS to the Johns Hopkins graduate students, and, you look back at 56, Eisenhower threatened to kick Israel out of the United Nations. Eisenhower, threatened to end, UJA contributions with tax deductions and all sorts of things. That is always viewed by the Arabs for them as the high water, and by Israel as the low water mark is 56. So I'd have to think in terms of there was also no real relationship the way there is today. Sometimes people say the U.S.-Israel relationship, it's too big to fail. I mean, people forget that in the 50s, first of all, 48, the United States imposed an arms embargo on both sides. People forget that. The arms embargo is really broken to Israel in 1962 when the Kennedy administration allowed Hawk missiles, that's surface-to-air defensive missiles, and that was the first time, 14 years after Israel was born. So compare that to $3 billion, Iron Dome, the security cooperation which exists between the two countries today. We've come a long way, baby. It's really remarkable, and sometimes we forget how far we've come. Now, in terms of the emotional intensity of the debate, I was still a college student during AWACS. I was a journalist already in Israel in 1992 when the loan guarantees, I was at Kennebunkport when they lifted it, when Rabin was elected. I was there with him when Bush lifted it. Those were intense debates also. But I think I've talked to people who were in Washington in those times, and people say there's nothing like this. People forget. I mean, Bush said, I'm one lonely man here. Ronald Reagan, though, did say, we're not going to base our decisions based on foreign countries. And even at Osirak, he suspended arms shipments to Israel. It was, I think, for a month. It was a slap on the wrist. But Reagan used some very tough language. Bush used tough language. People don't remember that. But I think what's been so difficult here is also that the Jewish community has been divided. And that, I think, is a very sad thing. Because when you say the word nuclear, that means it's the ultimate. And so it's going to become much more emotional than an AWACS or a loan guarantee. It's about existence. And therefore, it's a different sort of debate. Everyone I've surveyed who was involved, people in the government, outside the government, they all say this is the most they've ever seen. This is like the Yom Kippur War of 73 in terms of intensity. I hope it passes. I mean, if I had a genie, and I would say, the genie would give me some wishes, I would say, first, genie, restore bipartisanship. That's been the genius of the U.S.-Israel relationship. Those are the pillars that have allowed the whole edifice to be built. Those are foundational. And that whoever came up with this deserves the Nobel Prize, because that these guys, like I said, can't agree on what day of the week it is, but they could agree on Israel. You don't want this to be partisan. I could tell you, I go to campuses, and I've been to made 97 trips, 71 different universities, because some I've visited multiple times. 24 of them I've gone to since I left the government in September. And I was out in California, which are I only go to the tough ones. So if it's an easy campus, you won't see me usually. But the whole UC, the University of California thing, is with this whole BDS issue and all that, which we won't talk about tonight. But I was out there right after the Netanyahu announced that he was going. I was actually in Israel. I got a call from a senior U.S. official within minutes. It was 1 a.m. telling me this just happened. I was like, oh, wow, this is going to be interesting. But I was out in California shortly thereafter, and what I noticed, and I say this out of real sorrow because I see the changing demographic in America. And, minorities are becoming much more part of the fabric of the country as the country evolves. And I noticed that all of a sudden, once they announced this, black students stopped coming to my talks in California. And this hurt me very much because I've always had a lot of black students and I've always had very good interactions. And I asked somebody who was close to the black students on one of the campuses, and I don't claim this to be scientific, and he said, well, they kind of said the view is, if you disrespect my president, I don't care anymore. I'm not going to come. And that's, again, I'm not trying to put the blame on the prime minister here. I'm just saying that what happens in Washington, someone catches a cold, somebody sneezes out in California. Somebody sneezes in Washington, someone catches a cold in California. It goes very fast. Within days I felt it. So I worry about the bipartisanship. So if I had a genie, I would say to the genie, restore that. And that will bring American Jews back together again, too. Point 2, the security relationship. And again, if you remember anything from this talk, remember the importance of that, of the U.S.-Israel security relationship. Because if this deal is done, the U.S. and America and Israelis are going to have to work closer than ever to help monitor this agreement, to help deal with financial flows, to monitor that, to deal maybe even with interdiction on the seas if we're working with the Gulf states. The U.S. is going to have to be there. Israel's going to have to be there. There's so many pieces here that you need this close cooperation. And the good news is the professionals on both sides say they want it, and the good news is the politicians say it'll happen. So I hope that they're both right, and that relationship, which I see as the core of the core for the U.S.-Israel relationship, that will be restored. The third thing from the genie, usually get 3 requests of the genie, is that I just hope that the civility that has been key, to debates, that however this ends, there's a day after, and that we're going to have to work together. American Jews within the American Jewish community, the U.S.-Israel relationship, we've got to somehow keep the debate in bounds. I was quoted twice on the front page of the New York Times in the last few weeks in front page stories saying, don't drive this debate over a cliff. In other words, don't impugn the motives on either side. If you're against it, that doesn't make you a warmonger. You're concerned. And if you're for it, that doesn't make you Chamberlain and appeaser. Okay? We're going to both have to work together somehow. And so I guess 3 is an amalgam of 1 and 2, that the rules of civility that have kept us in such good stead in overcoming past differences. This isn't the first time there are differences. Like I said, there were huge differences from Eisenhower onward. This, I think, is cut deeper somehow. We got to heal those wounds. We got to keep people together. There's a day after. We're going to have to work together. So I realize it'll take time. It'll take time within the American Jewish community. It'll take time with this administration. It'll maybe take time with the U.S.-Israeli military establishments. I think with them it'll take the least amount of time, is my prediction, because they're professionals and they're pragmatic people. I know them on both sides. They're excellent, really serious people. Those are my 3 hopes for the genie, that we overcome these differences, and because they're deeply felt, they're real. And just because you don't agree on both sides, like I said, doesn't make you a warmonger. And it really angered me, and I said it, that there should be no dog whistling. There should be no talking in codes to activists, to your base, to say, if these are the people who lead us to war. That has been a motif, unfortunately, in the past that Jews have had to deal with. And I think it's very important, and I'm very glad the debate in the last 2 weeks seems to have been restored to where it was in the beginning. I just felt in the middle we really went off a cliff, and I don't want to get back on a cliff. But I mean, it's really important to keep this within bounds. I can't urge this enough. Thank you.
That is